Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question wanting to know if reducing rest times between sets can count as a form of progressive overload. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about that. All right, interesting question because my stance has changed slightly on this one based upon newer evidence and studies that have come out in the last year actually looking at this topic. Dr. Brad Schoenfeld did some actual studies on this as far as muscle hypertrophy goes. And what he found was that any decrease in rest times, which reduces the weight on the bar, meaning if you have to use less weight due to the reduced rest times, that over time that this showed less muscle gain. So as far as it being any sort of long-term form of progressive overload, no, it's not. I have always historically said that in order of importance, the forms of progressive overload that will stimulate new muscle growth are going to be number one, tension on the bar. Tension, that's the amount of weight on the bar versus the form you're using. Obviously, if your form changes, tension on the muscle changes. But if you're maintaining the exact same form, that any increase on the bar is the most important form of progressive overload. It will stimulate the best muscle growth. Now, barring that, because we can't always increase that, increasing reps with the same weight, again, always using the same technique. You can't judge progressive overload when you start changing angles involved, because that shifts tension on the muscle. That means the same technique, same range of motion, and that cannot be stressed enough. That increasing reps, meaning if you're using X amount of weight, if you were only able to do 6 reps at one time for your sets, but you're able to do 7 reps or 8 reps, you will grow as a result of that. That is progressive overload. You've subjected the muscle to more workload, which makes you stronger, it makes you bigger. No doubt about that. The other things that I've said after that, when that fails, increasing volume, because again, you reach a threshold to where if you just try to increase the weight all the time, eventually you can't. You try to just increase the reps all the time, it's going to slow down also. When you've stalled with those, increasing the volume is a good way. And that's, again, volume, the number of sets you do. Let's say you've been doing 3 sets of 8 with a given weight, right? You started with, 3 sets of 5, build up 3 sets of 8, and you're stalling there. Okay, maybe add a 4th set. Again, you're doing more work, but in that case, so remember, you're just doing more work over time. It's not increasing workload density per se. The only way to increase workload density, the amount of work you're doing per unit of time, which again stimulates growth, is to either increase weight on the bar, right, because every rep is heavier, or to reduce rest time. So reducing rest times becomes the 4th form of progressive overload. Now, the whole concept between reducing rest times has been that this is a better way to stimulate metabolic fatigue because the muscle hasn't fully recovered. You're subjecting it to the same workload. What has been found now for hypertrophy purposes only, there are other forms of training with other goals where reduced rest times can have different benefits. But what has been found is that if it causes you to use less weight on the bar, reducing rest times causes less muscle growth. That's been studied now. And I used to say, no, if you can just reduce rest times, it'll be okay. That it will stimulate muscle growth through additional metabolic fatigue because the muscles haven't recovered quite as much between sets. That doesn't really seem to be the case other than maybe as a test to see if you need to increase weight. This normally gets addressed in periodization though, guys. The thing that you guys need to remember when we talk about progressive overload, well planned out periodization rotates through these things. If it's programmed right for your experience level by a decent coach, that most forms of periodization will change the right component right before you stall. You won't stall because what will end up happening if it's timed right, you will usually change it a few days to a week before you would have actually stalled. So most forms of periodization will rotate through the increased weight, increased reps, and increased volume. Now, as far as reduced rest times, like I was saying, it's really mixed. I used to always say, okay, yeah, that's great. But when the data is showing that if the weight gets reduced as a result of it, it's less gains. Well, stop and think about that. Let's say you've gone from 3-minute rest times down to 1-minute rest times with the same weight. Stop and think about that for a minute. That means you're able to replicate the same weight and rates, weight and reps and sets with less recovery between sets. Doesn't that mean you're stronger and you have a higher work capacity already? If you're able to do that, and that's a good test, guys. That's actually a good test to maybe for one workout to test and see if you can cut the rest times and replicate. And if you can, what does that tell you? That tells you that you're training sub-maximally already, because there's no way you could cut from 2 minutes to 1 minute and lift the same weight and reps unless you've been sandbagging it. Meaning you were leaving a hell of a lot in the tank, and that's okay. When you're doing certain frequencies of training, leaving something in the tank is acceptable. But if you're able to cut those rest times down, that means you probably could have added weight to the bar, because there's no way you're doing 3 sets of 8, 2 minutes apart, and then cutting it down to 1 minute and not running out of steam before you get to the end of the 3rd set. And if you're able to complete all of them, that means you probably are stronger than you think you are. And if you go ahead and just add weight and go back to the 2 minutes, you'll do better. But yeah, what was found in this research was that if hypertrophy was your primary goal, to do a given number of reps and sets, that you will gain more muscle if you take 2 to 3 minute breaks. 2 to 3 minute breaks with a slightly heavier weight. All right, that is what's been found, and it's hard to argue with that data, and it makes sense that workload density itself is a form of metabolic fatigue has been overrated. That actually what gives the best form of metabolic fatigue is to add more reps with the same weight. That's actually what gives you the best metabolic fatigue, and that's usually most bodybuilders aren't as concerned with tension as a primary thing. A lot of them concern themselves more with fatigue, metabolic fatigue. That's why they're doing higher reps. But they need to realize that both are factors in hypertrophy. Weight on the bar, which is tension, reps, and sets, all matter. They're all important. They're all going to affect your gains. But yeah, the reduced rest times, apparently not. So what are reduced rest times useful for? Speed training, dynamic effort training. People who want to do more explosive reps with a lighter weight. And the reason it's useful there is not because it gives you more gains, because truth be told, you really think you're going to gain more muscle by resting 60 seconds instead of 2 minutes? No, of course not. But the idea is that explosiveness takes 30 to 60 seconds to return. Normally, the human body, the peripheral nervous system, will only allow you to do about approximately 3 reps, maybe 4 or 5 in some cases, but 3 is generally the practical cutoff. 3 reps with maximum speed. After that, your nervous system slows down. It's just like if you were to punch as fast as you can, if you were to measure that, or kick as fast as you could, it's not just weights, it's other kinetic endeavors. You're going to find that you can only punch with maximum speed and power 3 times in a row before, if you start measuring it, it slows down for the 4th and 5th until you have a 30 to 60 second break in there before you punch again with maximum speed, or try to. Your nervous system won't let you do it. You've only got about 3 hits. So by cutting the training down to that, what you are doing is allowing yourself to get as many maximum speed reps in as possible. So for speed type training, dynamic effort training, doing 2 to 3 reps, those shorter breaks work because you don't need the recovery. You haven't metabolically fatigued yourself. If you come in and do 70 or 75% of your max 3 times really fast, you haven't induced much metabolic fatigue. You don't need time to clear metabolites. It's not really an issue. And it's not saying that you couldn't just rest 3 minutes. You could rest 3 minutes and get the same results doing that. But if you're coming in and doing 10 sets of 3, you could be done with that in 10 or 11 minutes if you rested 60 seconds. If you rated 3 minutes, you're going to take you over 30 minutes to do one exercise. So it's a matter of time economy, because there is no negative for that form of training. It doesn't hurt you in any way to rest only 60 seconds, or in some cases as short as 30 or 45, depending on your conditioning and everything. You're not harming your gains in any way to do so. So what you're doing is you're getting yourself out of the gym 20 minutes faster. And you're not in there just fucking around on your cell phone and stuff between sets, because there's no need for that much recovery for that style of training. So again, for maximum power, there is something to be said for short breaks for time economy, But as far as progressive overload goes, no, apparently not. And I used to believe that was the case, and I've been shown wrong by the data. That no, the shorter rest times do not help with muscle growth, because generally that means you could have just added more weight to the bar, got more tension, and tension is actually your biggest driving component. All right, tension is going to be the most important thing, with metabolic fatigue being a very, very close second, because they all tie in together. They tie in together tremendously. So that would allow you to just get more tension on the bar, get more work done per unit of time, and more total tonnage done if you were to just add a little more weight and bring it back out to 2 minutes. So unfortunately, no, it's not really a form of progressive overload according to the newest data. So we can scratch that off as number 4. But we need to remember it does have its place in certain styles of training to run short breaks, just not if your primary goal is muscle hypertrophy or size gains. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.